The acrid smell of burning insulation filled the cramped maintenance corridor of EOS 9 station. Flickering lights cast long shadows that danced across the metal walls, momentarily revealing decades of rust and corrosion before plunging sections back into darkness. Steam hissed from a cracked thermal conduit, adding to the perpetual fog that seemed to hang in the station's lower levels. Finn Matthews wiped sweat from his brow with a greasy forearm, leaving a dark smudge across his forehead. He squinted through the vapor at the leaking pipe joint, his expression hardening. Third leak this week in the same section. The station was falling apart faster than he could patch it. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered, tightening a clamp around the joint. The tool slipped, and Finn's knuckles scraped against the rough metal. He swore, sucking on the fresh cut before returning to the task with grim determination. At 34, Finn had spent nearly a decade drifting from one repair job to another across the outer colonies. EOS 9 was just the latest in a string of derelict outposts where he exchanged his technical skills for meager credits and a place to sleep. The work was the same everywhere. Endless repairs on systems designed to last 20 years, but stretched well beyond 50. The faces changed, but the neglect remained constant. When the patch finally held, Finn gathered his tools and crawled out from the service tunnel, his joints protesting after hours in the cramped space. He rolled his shoulders, wincing at the familiar ache that never quite went away. His living quarters were no more inviting than the maintenance shafts. Located in a forgotten corner of the residential ring, the room was barely large enough for a fold-down cot and a small storage locker. The walls were patched with mismatched metal plates, and the air recycler rattled with a concerning rhythm every time it cycled. The heating system had given up months ago, forcing Finn to sleep in his work clothes on the coldest nights. Finn tossed his toolkit onto his cot and checked his credit balance on his worn datapad. The screen flickered before displaying his account. Payment delayed again. Station manager Durrell had promised compensation for the overtime Finn had put in during the last oxygen scrubber failure, but the credits never seemed to materialize. It was a familiar story. The station's management always claimed budget constraints while somehow managing to keep the luxury sections running smoothly for visiting officials and merchants. "Just enough to keep us alive," Finn muttered to himself, sinking onto his cot. He reached for his ration pack, tearing open the silver wrapper to reveal a brownish block of pressed nutrients. As he chewed the tasteless substance, he stared at the ceiling, counting the rust patterns he'd memorized over the months. The door to his quarters slid open without warning. Finn bolted upright, nearly choking on his ration bar. Nobody ever came to this section uninvited. Security protocols required authorization codes for private quarters. A tall figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the corridor's dim lighting. As she stepped forward, the light caught her features, and Finn felt his breath catch. She wasn't human. Her skin was a pale mint green that seemed to shimmer subtly under the harsh lighting. Long, silver-white hair cascaded over shoulders draped in an intricate garment that appeared to be woven from some metallic thread. Her features were striking. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and large, almond-shaped eyes that were an unsettling shade of violet. She carried herself with unmistakable authority, yet there was something desperate in the way her eyes darted around the small room. "Finnegan Matthews?" Her voice was melodious, with an accent Finn couldn't place. Not surprising for non-human species. "Just Finn," he replied automatically, rising to his feet. "How did you get in here? And what do you want?" The woman closed the door behind her and straightened to her full height, nearly a head taller than Finn. "I am Nikora Valkin, daughter of the first house of Pax Lunaria, widow of Commander Thelias Valkin." She paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. "And I need you to marry me." Finn stared at her, certain he had misheard. "You need me to what?" "Marry me," she repeated, her voice lowering. "According to Galactic law, I have 3 days left to find a spouse before I forfeit all rights to my husband's estate and my personal freedom." She stepped closer, violet eyes blazing with intensity. "Marry me, and I'll warm your bed." Finn backed up until his legs hit the edge of his cot. "Lady, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but..." No scam, she interrupted, producing a small device from within her robe. It projected a holographic document stamped with official-looking seals. The Dominion's widow law is quite explicit. As a widow without children, I must remarry within 60 standard cycles of my husband's passing, or all assets revert to his family line. I would become property under Pax Lunarian custom. Finn squinted at the projection, recognizing the Galactic Dominion seal. Why me? There must be thousands of better candidates in this sector alone. Nisra's composure faltered momentarily. Time is critical. The Dominion auditors will arrive soon. I've researched every unmarried resident on this station compatible with interspecies union. You have no criminal record, no outstanding debts to major corporations, and no prior marriages. She paused. You're also isolated enough that a sudden marriage wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. The bluntness of her assessment stung, even if it was accurate. So, I'm convenient. Precisely. She shut off the projection. I don't need love, human. I need a legal contract that protects my interests. In return, you'll be compensated adequately. Compensated how? Despite himself, Finn was curious. His situation could hardly get worse. Immediate transfer of 10,000 credits upon registration of our union. Housing allocation upgrade. Improved ration allotment. She listed the benefits clinically. And, of course, the social advantages of being allied with House Valken. Finn ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. It was absurd, marrying a stranger, an alien no less, for convenience. Yet the promise of 10,000 credits, that was freedom from EOS 9, a chance to start somewhere that didn't reek of rust and desperation. What's the catch? He asked finally. There's always a catch. The Dominion requires verification that our union is authentic. There will be inspections, interviews, possibly biometric scans to ensure we're not engaged in fraud. Her expression remained neutral. We would need to cohabitate and present as a genuine couple. For how long? 6 months, minimum. After that, we could discreetly arrange a separation that wouldn't trigger forfeiture clauses. Finn paced the small confines of his quarters, mind racing through possibilities and pitfalls. This woman, this alien, was offering him a way out of his grinding existence. But what cost? What if this was some elaborate trap? What if her husband's family came looking for revenge? And yet, 10,000 credits. A better place to live. Food that didn't taste like processed cardboard. I'll need something in writing, he said finally. Legal protection for myself, in case this goes sideways. Relief flickered across Nisra's features, so briefly Finn almost missed it. She produced a small tablet from within her robes and extended it toward him. Standard union contract, modified for our specific arrangement. All terms are outlined, including dissolution conditions and protection clauses. Finn took the tablet, scanning the densely packed legal text. His eyes widened at the compensation details. The initial sum was just the beginning. There were housing, stipends, health benefits, even educational credits he could use for technical certification upgrades. This is comprehensive, he admitted. House Valken doesn't engage in half measures, Nikera replied. Do we have an agreement? Finn took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His life had been a series of temporary fixes and makeshift solutions. Perhaps it was time for something different, even if it came in the form of a contractual marriage to an alien widow. What I need to do? He asked. Place your thumbprint here. She indicated a glowing section at the bottom of the contract. The system will record our biometric data and register the union with the Dominion Central Database. Finn hesitated one last moment, then pressed his thumb against the screen. The device hummed, scanning his print and DNA signature. A moment later, the screen flashed green, displaying the words "Union logged" in several languages. It's done, Nikera said softly, taking back the tablet. For the first time since entering his quarters, something like vulnerability crossed her features. Thank you. Finn nodded, suddenly feeling as though the gravity had been adjusted in his small room. Everything felt different, heavier somehow, yet with a strange undercurrent of possibility he hadn't felt in years. I'll arrange for my belongings to be transferred here tomorrow, Nikera said, moving toward the door. We should begin establishing our narrative immediately. As the door slid shut behind her, Finn sank back onto his cot, staring at the thumb that had just signed away 6 months of his life. What the hell did I just do? He whispered to the empty room. The gravity of his decision didn't fully register until the following morning when Nikera returned with 3 large containers of possessions, more than Finn had accumulated in his entire adult life. The reality of sharing his minuscule living space became immediately apparent as she began unpacking items that seemed entirely out of place in the utilitarian quarters. Where are you planning to put all of this? Finn asked, watching as she removed what appeared to be ceremonial robes from one container. Accommodations will need to be adjusted, Nikera replied matter-of-factly, examining the rusted wall panels with barely concealed dismay. I require a meditation space. Paxlinarians need regular centering periods to maintain psionic balance. Meditation space? This entire room is barely 6 square meters. Finn gestured around them. And what's a psionic balance? Nikera straightened, fixing him with those unsettling violet eyes. Mental harmony. Without it, my species experiences neural degradation. She glanced toward the rattling air recycler. Though I suspect the ambient noise levels here may make proper meditation impossible regardless. Finn felt a flash of irritation. Sorry my accommodations don't meet your high standards, Your Highness. Some of us don't have the luxury of. He stopped mid-sentence as Nikera moved past him to the environmental control panel, her movements suddenly focused. With swift, practiced motions, she removed the panel cover, examined the circuitry within, and began making adjustments with her slender fingers. What are you doing? Finn demanded. Recalibrating, she replied without looking up. Your thermal regulator is misaligned by at least 7 degrees. The fluctuations must make sleep difficult. Finn watched in astonishment as she made a series of precise adjustments to the system he'd been fighting with for months. Within minutes, the rattling subsided and warm air began flowing steadily from the vents for the first time since his arrival. How did you do that? He asked, genuinely impressed. Nikera replaced the panel, wiping her hands on a silk-like cloth she produced from her sleeve. Commander Thelia's served on military vessels for 30 years. I learned to assist with environmental systems when we were stationed on outpost duties. A shadow crossed her face at the mention of her late husband. Proper environmental controls were always his priority. The brief glimpse into her past created an awkward silence between them. Finn cleared his throat. Well, thanks. That's been driving me crazy for months. They spent the rest of the day negotiating the small space, establishing boundaries and routines. Finn learned that Nikera required less sleep than humans, but needed 2 hours of meditation daily. She discovered that Finn worked irregular shifts maintaining station systems and often returned covered in industrial lubricants and coolants. As night's cycle approached, the inevitable question of sleeping arrangements arose. I'll take the floor, Finn offered, pulling a spare blanket from his storage locker. You can have the cot. Nikera regarded the narrow bed skeptically. It appears uncomfortable by any species standards. It's better than the floor, Finn shrugged, spreading his blanket in the cramped space beside the cot. They lay in silence for some time, the improved heating system creating an almost comfortable temperature in the small room. Just as Finn was drifting towards sleep, Nissara's voice emerged from the darkness. The Dominion auditors will review our living arrangements. A married couple would typically share sleeping quarters. Finn rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. We got time to figure that out, right? They won't be here immediately. Silence stretched between them before Nikera replied. We received notification while you were completing your shift. The primary audit will occur in 5 days. Finn sat up abruptly. 5 days? I thought we'd have weeks to prepare. The scheduling is deliberately unpredictable to prevent fraud preparation. Her voice was calm, but Finn could detect underlying tension. We must accelerate our familiarization process. Familiarization process? Finn repeated incredulously. You make it sound like programming a new tool. Is that not what this is? A tool for mutual benefit. Nikera shifted on the cot, and in the dim light, Finn could see her outline as she turned to face him. We must convince the auditors that we have formed a genuine attachment. Dominion verification includes biomarker analysis. They can detect stress responses indicating deception. The gravity of their situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about sharing space or showing documentation. They needed to convince sophisticated monitoring systems that they were genuinely married, systems designed specifically to catch people doing exactly what they were attempting. So what do we do? Finn asked finally. Tomorrow, we begin practicing physical proximity and shared activities, Nikera replied. Holding hands, embracing, the physical indicators of affection. Finn felt his face warm at the clinical way she described these intimate gestures. Right, he mumbled. Sounds like a fun day. The silence returned, heavier this time. Why? 3 days? Finn asked suddenly. Pardon? You said you had 3 days left to find a spouse. Why such a specific deadline? Nikera was quiet for so long that Finn thought she might have fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, less assured than he'd heard before. Pax Lunary custom gives a widow 60 cycles to remarry. When my husband died, I initially intended to accept my fate, to return to his family as a dependent, as tradition dictates. But then I discovered. She paused. It doesn't matter. I changed my mind too late. By the time I decided to seek a spouse, only 3 days remained before the legal deadline. What happens if you miss the deadline? Finn pressed. Under Galactic law, I would be forfeited. All assets would transfer to my husband's lineage. Under Pax Lunary custom, I would become property of his house, with no legal standing of my own. Property? Finn echoed, horrified. That's still legal? The Dominion permits cultural autonomy in domestic matters, Nikera replied, her tone carefully neutral. Many find such arrangements distasteful, but they are protected under diversity statutes. Finn sat with this information, his discomfort with their arrangement suddenly reframing itself. This wasn't just a convenient business transaction for Nikera. It was survival. Get some sleep, he said finally. Sounds like we got a lot of practicing to do tomorrow. The next morning brought a new level of awkwardness as they attempted to establish routines that would appear natural to outside observers. Finn found himself hyper-aware of Nisra's presence in the small space. The unfamiliar scent that reminded him of something like mint and ozone. The precise way she moved, the subtle luminescence of her skin under certain lighting. We should practice physical contact, she announced after they had shared a breakfast of standard rations, which Nikera consumed with diplomatic politeness despite her obvious distaste. Right now? Finn asked, suddenly feeling like his hands were too large and ungainly. The biomarkers need time to establish baseline patterns, she explained, extending her hand palm up on the small table between them. Regular contact over several days will create a neurochemical signature consistent with established relationships. You make it sound so romantic, Finn muttered, but placed his hand atop hers. Her skin was surprisingly warm, with a texture like smooth suede. He could feel a subtle vibration beneath the surface, almost like a purring cat. Nisra's expression remained neutral, but Finn noticed a slight darkening of the green along her cheekbones. A blush, perhaps? What should I know about you? He asked, trying to ignore the strangeness of their joined hands. If we're supposed to be married, I should probably know the basics. Logical, she nodded. I am 42 standard years old, equivalent to approximately 35 human years in development. My specializations are in quantum communications and cultural diplomacy. I serve alongside Commander Thelias during his last posting at the Galactic Core Embassy, where I facilitated trade negotiations between the Dominion and several non-aligned systems. Finn blinked at the formal biography. I meant more like, what foods do you enjoy? What makes you laugh? Do you have any hobbies? Nikera appeared momentarily confused by these questions. I prefer fermented proteins with mineral supplements. I find satisfaction in precise calculations and efficient systems. I cultivate sonic crystals in my spare time. She tilted her head. Is this information valuable? It's what people know about their partners, Finn explained. Not just credentials and dietary requirements. Over the next hours, they exchanged increasingly personal information, moving from basic preferences to life experiences. Finn described growing up in the outer colonies, his early apprenticeship with a traveling maintenance crew, and his gradual drift toward the fringes as opportunities in the core systems dried up. Nikera spoke of her arranged marriage to Commander Thelias, a political union that had evolved into mutual respect over their 15 years together. She hinted at tensions with his powerful family, but avoided specifics. By midday, they graduated to practicing casual touches, a hand on the shoulder, sitting close together, brief embraces that grew less awkward with repetition. Finn was surprised to find himself growing comfortable with her proximity, even as he reminded himself that this was all performance. "You're tense," Nikera observed during their fourth attempt at a convincing embrace. "The monitors will detect elevated stress markers." "I'm trying," Finn sighed, consciously attempting to relax his shoulders. "It's not exactly natural to force intimacy on a schedule." Nikera stepped back, studying him with those penetrating violet eyes. "Perhaps we are approaching this incorrectly. Genuine connection cannot be manufactured through repetition alone." She considered for a moment. "Tell me about your work. What satisfies you about it?" The question caught Finn off guard. No one had ever asked him that before. Station management cared about completion metrics, not job satisfaction. "I like solving problems," he said after a moment's reflection. "Finding the right fix when everyone else has given up. There's something satisfying about making broken things work again." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly self-conscious. "Sounds simple, I know." "Not at all," Nikera replied. "Creation is universal, but restoration requires special insight, seeing what something once was and could be again." A small smile curved her lips. "Commander Thelias would have appreciated your perspective. He often said that maintaining was more difficult than building." The mention of her late husband brought another question to Finn's mind. "Can I ask how he died?" Nisra's expression closed off immediately, her posture stiffening. "A diplomatic mission to non-aligned territories. Official reports cited environmental system failure." Her voice had returned to its formal cadence. "I should prepare for my meditation period now." Finn recognized the deflection, but didn't press. They each had boundaries, even in this strange arrangement. They spent the remainder of the day in separate activities, Nikera in her meditation, and Finn catching up on station reports on his datapad. That night, after another awkward negotiation of sleeping arrangements that ended with both of them sharing the cot at a careful distance, Finn laid awake thinking about their predicament. He was still no closer to understanding why Nikera had chosen him specifically, but he was beginning to see that there was more to her story than she had initially revealed. Whatever her reasons, he was committed now. The credits had already been transferred to his account, enough to start fresh somewhere else after their arrangement concluded. All he had to do was convince the auditors that he had somehow won the heart of this elegant, enigmatic alien widow. How hard could that be? The answer came 3 days later when the environmental system in Finn's sector suffered a catastrophic failure. Alarms blared throughout the residential ring as oxygen levels plummeted and toxic coolant leaked from ruptured pipes. Finn had been in the middle of a maintenance cycle in an adjacent sector when the emergency protocols activated, automatically sealing off the affected areas. His quarters, where Nikera was meditating, were in the contamination zone. Finn sprinted through the corridors, ignoring the evacuation orders blaring over the station's comm system. He arrived at the sealed bulkhead, separating him from his sector, fingers flying over the emergency override panel. The system resisted his technician credentials. Override authorization denied. The system announced in its flat, computerized voice. Contamination protocols in effect. Please proceed to evacuation assembly point Delta. Like hell, Finn muttered, pulling a multi-tool from his belt. He pried open the control panel, exposing the manual override circuits beneath. This was against every safety protocol, but all he could think about was Nikera, possibly unconscious or worse in their quarters. It took precious minutes to bypass the safety systems. By the time the bulkhead grudgingly slid open, warning alarms were screaming in his ears. The corridor beyond was filled with a greenish haze, coolant vapor, toxic if concentrated. Finn pulled his work mask over his face, knowing it offered minimal protection at best. He moved as quickly as he could through the contaminated sector, passing other sealed quarters where residents had presumably evacuated. The air grew thicker as he approached his own quarters, the vapor burning his eyes despite the mask protection. The door to his quarters was locked down under emergency protocols. Finn overrode the system, his fingers slipping on the controls as the toxic atmosphere began affecting his coordination. When the door finally slid open, he nearly collapsed with relief to see Nikera conscious, though clearly disoriented. She had wrapped a damp cloth around her lower face and was attempting to seal a vent that was spewing vapor. "We need to get out," Finn shouted over the alarms, reaching for her arm. Nikera shook her head, pointing urgently at the vent. "Source must stop flow, spreading to adjacent sectors." Finn understood immediately. The emergency systems had failed to isolate the coolant leak at its source. If they didn't stop it here, the entire contamination zone would expand. Together, they fought through the thickening vapor toward the primary junction box where Finn could access the coolant flow controls. Nissara's breathing grew labored, the cloth around her face darkening as it absorbed toxins. Finn wasn't faring much better, his vision beginning to blur at the edges. When they reached the junction box, Finn's hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the controls. Without a word, Nikera steadied his hands with her own, their fingers working in tandem to reroute the coolant flow away from the damaged section. The vapor continued to swirl around them, but the active flow of new toxins gradually subsided. "Emergency teams!" Finn managed, his consciousness fading. He felt himself sliding toward the floor, legs no longer able to support his weight. The last thing he remembered was Nissara's arms around him, her voice in his ears saying something he couldn't quite make out, and the strange, comforting warmth of her skin against his as darkness claimed him. He woke in the station's medical bay, an oxygen mask covering his face and a concerned-looking medical technician hovering nearby. "You're lucky to be alive," the technician informed him, checking his vitals. "If your wife hadn't dragged you to the extraction point, you'd have suffered permanent neural damage." "My wife," Finn repeated weakly, before remembering their arrangement. "Nikera, is she?" "Paxlinarians have better tolerance for respiratory toxins than humans," the technician explained. "She's been treated and released. Insisted on remaining by your bed until an hour ago, when I forced her to get some rest." He shook his head admiringly. "Never seen dedication like that. She kept monitoring your vitals and adjusting your treatment parameters. Knew more about xenobiological compatibility than some of our staff." Finn processed this information slowly, his mind still foggy from the toxins. Nikera had saved him, had stayed with him, had cared for him beyond what their arrangement required. "When can I leave?" he asked. "Another 6 hours observation, minimum. That coolant is nasty stuff." After the technician moved on to other patients, Finn laid back, staring at the sterile ceiling of the medical bay. Something had shifted during their crisis, something he couldn't quite define but could definitely feel. The performance they'd been rehearsing had transformed into something real in those desperate moments. When Nikera returned to the medical bay 3 hours later, Finn found himself genuinely pleased to see her. She appeared slightly paler than usual, with darker green patches under her eyes suggesting fatigue, but otherwise unharmed. "The technician says you saved my life," he said as she took the seat beside his bed. "You risked yours attempting to reach me," she replied, studying his face with those penetrating violet eyes. "Why did you not evacuate as instructed?" The question caught him off guard. Why hadn't he evacuated? The logical thing would have been to wait for emergency teams rather than breaching containment protocols. "I was worried," he admitted simply. "I knew you were there alone." Something softened in her expression. "That was unexpected." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you." The silence between them felt different now, charged with something unspoken, yet increasingly difficult to ignore. Finn found himself noticing details about her he'd overlooked before. The subtle patterns in her mint-green skin, the graceful curve of her neck, the way her silver-white hair caught the light. The next day, Finn was released from medical with orders to rest for 48 hours. When they returned to their quarters, they found the environmental systems restored and the space thoroughly decontaminated. The station manager had even sent a message commending them for preventing the spread of contamination, though conspicuously absent was any mention of compensation for their efforts or acknowledgement of the system failures that had caused the crisis. As night's cycle approached, the awkwardness around sleeping arrangements had disappeared. Without discussion, they both prepared for sleep and settled onto the cot, no longer maintaining the careful distance of previous nights. When Nisra's arm draped across his chest in the darkness, Finn found himself placing his hand over hers, a gesture that felt surprisingly natural. "The Dominion auditors arrive tomorrow," she whispered, her breath warm against his shoulder. Finn squeezed her hand gently. "We'll be ready." The Dominion audit team arrived with the precision and cold efficiency Finn had expected. Led by a severe-looking official who introduced himself as Auditor Vexerin, the team of 4 set up their equipment in a small conference room in the station's administrative sector. Finn and Nikera were instructed to arrive separately, an apparent test to ensure their stories aligned without prior coordination. Finn went first, seated across from Vexerin, while 2 assistants monitored equipment that Finn assumed was measuring his physiological responses. The questions started innocuously enough: how they met, what attracted him to Nikera, basic details about their relationship. Finn stuck to their rehearsed narrative with small, natural embellishments, describing how Nisra's intelligence and determination had first caught his attention. "And you were not concerned about the obvious cultural differences?" Vexerin asked, his tone suggesting skepticism. "Everyone on a station like this comes from somewhere different," Finn replied honestly. "You learn to see past those differences pretty quickly when you're sharing recycled air and limited resources." The questions grew progressively more personal, delving into private habits, sleeping arrangements, future plans. Finn found himself drawing less on their rehearsed answers and more on their actual experiences over the past days. The way Nikera systematically organized their small space, her precise movements when adjusting environmental controls, the surprising warmth of her skin against his. When asked about their most meaningful moment together, Finn described the coolant leak without hesitation. She could have evacuated, saved herself. Instead, she stayed to help me stop the leak from spreading. Then she dragged me to safety when I collapsed. The sincerity in his voice surprised even him. That's when I knew this was real. After nearly 2 hours of questioning, Finn was dismissed to a waiting area while Nikera underwent her interrogation. He paced the small space, wondering how she was faring under the auditor's cold scrutiny. Despite their preparation, he worried that her more formal nature might come across as rehearsed or insincere. When they were finally reunited for the joint portion of the audit, Finn was relieved to see that Nikera appeared composed, though a darkening along her cheekbones suggested she was under stress. They sat side by side at the table, and without thinking, Finn reached for her hand. She threaded her fingers through his, the familiar warmth of her touch unexpectedly calming. Physical demonstrations of affection are common in many species, Vexerin observed clinically. However, they can be easily performed without genuine attachment. Our final assessment requires more conclusive evidence. Finn felt Nisra's hand tighten around his. "What kind of evidence?" he asked. "A simple test," Vexerin replied, activating a small device on the table. It projected a glowing field between them. "This scanner measures neurochemical responses to physical proximity. Please embrace, as you would in a private moment of affection." Finn looked at Nikera, saw her moment of hesitation before she nodded almost imperceptibly. They stood and turned toward each other. The rehearsed embraces of days past seemed mechanical now, inappropriate for the moment. Instead, Finn simply opened his arms, and Nikera stepped into them. The feeling of her body against his was no longer strange but familiar. The subtle vibration beneath her skin, the perfect way her taller frame bent to rest her head against his shoulder, the scent of her that reminded him of clean electrical systems and growing things. He closed his eyes, forgetting the auditors and their sensors, simply holding her. Sufficient, Vexerin announced after what seemed like both an eternity and not nearly long enough. The glowing field dissipated. You may separate. They pulled apart slowly, and Finn caught a glimpse of something in Nysra's eyes. Confusion, perhaps, or revelation, before she composed her features once more. The audit is complete, Vexerin stated, gathering his materials. Results will be transmitted within 24 standard hours. You are dismissed. They walked back to their quarters in silence, neither quite ready to discuss what had transpired. It wasn't until they were alone, doors sealed behind them, that Nykera spoke. You performed convincingly, she said, her back to him as she arranged her meditation cushion. I wasn't performing, Finn replied quietly. Nykera went still. The union is a legal arrangement, she reminded him after a moment, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. Is that all it is? Finn asked, surprising himself with his boldness, because it didn't feel like just a legal arrangement in that room. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Proximity can create temporary chemical responses that mimic attachment. It's a biological. Stop, Finn interrupted. Stop analyzing everything. Just be honest. When we were in there, when we were holding each other, did you feel something? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Nykera closed her eyes briefly, a gesture Finn had come to recognize as her gathering resolve. Yes, she admitted softly. I felt something unexpected. The admission hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Neither seemed prepared to explore its implications further. Instead, they moved through their evening routine with heightened awareness of each other, careful not to disturb the fragile understanding that had formed. That night, when they lay together on the cot, the distance between them had vanished entirely. Nysra's head rested against Finn's chest, his arm curved protectively around her shoulders. They didn't speak of audits or arrangements or the future, instead finding comfort in the simple truth of their shared warmth in the darkness. The notification of their audit results arrived during Finn's maintenance shift the following day. By the time he returned to their quarters, Nykera was waiting with the official transmission displayed on her tablet. We passed, she announced, a genuine smile transforming her features. The union is officially recognized and registered with full legal standing. The inheritance protections are secured. Finn felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also an unexpected pang at the reminder that their arrangement had begun as a business transaction. That's great news, he managed, settling his toolkit on the floor. So what happens now? Nysra's smile faltered slightly. Now we maintain our status. The Dominion's validation is only preliminary. There will be a secondary audit in approximately 40 standard days. Another audit? Finn hadn't anticipated this complication. I thought once we passed, that was it. The Dominion is thorough with inheritance cases, Nykera explained. They need to ensure the Union persists beyond the immediate threat of forfeiture. She hesitated before adding, there's also the matter of my former husband's family. They filed a petition questioning the legitimacy of our marriage. Finn sank onto the edge of the cot. You didn't mention that before. I didn't want to burden you with additional concerns. Nykera set the tablet aside and moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. House Valken stands to gain considerable assets if our union is nullified. They will be persistent. The weight of their situation settled more firmly on Finn's shoulders. What had begun as a simple transaction had evolved into something far more complicated, both legally and emotionally. He was no longer just helping a stranger avoid an unjust fate. He was entangled in interstellar politics and family disputes. Are you safe? He asked suddenly, the question surprising them both. From your husband's family, I mean. Nykera considered the question carefully. Physically, yes. The Dominion's recognition offers protection against direct intervention. But they have resources and influence. They could make life difficult. Finn nodded, processing this information. Then we make sure they don't have any grounds to challenge us. He reached for her hand, the gesture now familiar and comforting. We stick to the plan. We make this work. That night, their shared quarters felt different, more like a home than a temporary arrangement. Nikera had gradually added small touches that transformed the sterile space. A shimmering fabric draped over the harsh lighting to soften it. A small crystal that hummed with subtle vibrations when touched. Even the arrangement of their limited possessions reflected a merging of their lives. When Finn emerged from the station's communal shower facility, he found Nikera sitting cross-legged on her meditation cushion, eyes closed, a soft glow emanating from her palms where they rested on her knees. He moved quietly, not wanting to disturb her, but her eyes opened as he approached. "You're particularly tired tonight," she observed, the glow fading from her hands. "How can you tell? Your biorhythmic pattern is disrupted. Your shoulders are lower than usual, and your breathing is shallow." She rose gracefully from the cushion. Station management finally responded to the maintenance request for the primary circulation system. Finn nodded wearily. 3 weeks late, and with half the necessary parts. "I've been improvising with salvage components all day." He rolled his shoulders, wincing at the persistent ache. The whole system could fail within a month, but they won't allocate resources for a proper overhaul. Nikera approached him, hesitating briefly before placing her hands on his shoulders. "May I?" Paxlinarians have some skill with muscular tension points. Too exhausted to refuse, Finn nodded. Her fingers found pressure points with unerring accuracy, applying precisely calibrated pressure that sent waves of relief through his overworked muscles. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the unexpected pleasure of her touch. Commander Thelia's suffered similar tension patterns during extended missions, she explained softly, working methodically across his shoulders and upper back. Stress manifestations are remarkably similar across species. Finn noted how she now mentioned her late husband more frequently and with less pain in her voice. "You must miss him," he ventured. Her hands paused momentarily before continuing their work. "Yes," she admitted, "though perhaps not in the way you might expect. Ours was not a union based on romantic attachment. Initially, we grew into mutual respect and companionship." Her voice took on a reflective quality. "He was a good man, principled. He deserved a better end than he received." "What happened to him?" Finn asked, turning to face her. "Really?" Nisra's hands fell away from his shoulders, and she moved to sit on the edge of the cot. After a long moment, she spoke. "The official report cited environmental system failure during a diplomatic mission. The truth is more complex." She looked down at her hands, now folded in her lap. Commander Thelia's discovered evidence of corruption within his own house. Members of the Vulcan Directorate were diverting Dominion aid intended for developing systems. He intended to present this evidence to the Galactic Council, and his accident happened before he could, Finn concluded grimly. Nikera nodded, her expression hardening. "I cannot prove it was deliberate, but I know the commander was meticulous about environmental systems. He would never have overlooked a critical failure." "So his family—" "I have no direct evidence," she interrupted quickly. "Only suspicions. But after his death, when I discovered I was expected to forfeit my rights and independence to the very people I suspected of involvement." She shook her head. "I could not accept that fate." The pieces clicked into place for Finn. Nikera wasn't just avoiding an outdated cultural practice. She was protecting herself from people who might have murdered her husband. Her desperation to find a spouse before the deadline made perfect sense now. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. "You're not going back to them," he said firmly. "Not while I have anything to say about it." The vulnerability in her expression struck him deeply. For all her composure and capability, Nikera had been navigating tremendous danger alone until now. On impulse, he pulled her into an embrace, feeling her initial stiffness melt into acceptance as she relaxed against him. "Thank you," She whispered against his shoulder, the words barely audible. They remained that way for a long moment, the embrace no longer a rehearsed performance, but a genuine expression of growing connection. When they finally separated, something had shifted between them once again, another layer of pretense fallen away. That night, sharing the narrow cot had become natural, their bodies finding comfortable alignment despite the limited space. Finn drifted towards sleep with Nisra's head tucked against his shoulder, her breathing synchronized with his own. Just before consciousness faded entirely, he felt her fingers trace a pattern on his chest, a gesture of protection in Pax Lunarian culture, though he wouldn't learn this until much later. The following weeks brought unexpected improvements to their situation. Nikera received access to portions of her inheritance, allowing them to upgrade their living quarters to a slightly larger unit with functioning environmental controls and a proper sleeping platform. The additional space wasn't luxurious by any standard, but allowed each of them personal areas while maintaining their shared living arrangement. Finn's status as the spouse of Valken also brought subtle changes to his treatment around the station. Maintenance requests that had previously been ignored were suddenly approved. His pay credits arrived on schedule. Even station manager Durrell, who had been chronically dismissive of maintenance concerns, now responded to Finn's reports with grudging respect. Politics, Nikera explained when Finn mentioned change. House Valken has trade agreements with the corporation that manages this station. They won't risk offending a family connection, however tenuous. Well, I'm not complaining, Finn replied, reviewing a newly approved requisition for replacement parts he'd been requesting for months. Maybe we can finally get the recycler in C-section working properly. People down there have been dealing with air quality issues for over a year. Nikera smiled at his enthusiasm. You genuinely care about this station, don't you? Despite how poorly it's managed. Finn looked up from the requisition form, considering. Not the station, exactly. The people. Most of them are stuck here like I was, taking whatever work they can get, try to survive in a system that sees them as replaceable parts. He shrugged. If I can make their lives a little less miserable, why wouldn't I? You're a caretaker, Nikera observed. Even when those in authority fail in their responsibilities, you step in. Her expression grew thoughtful. Commander Thelia's was similar. He believed that leadership was fundamentally about service to others. The comparison pleased Finn more than he cared to admit. Over the weeks, he developed a strange respect for the man he'd never met. Nisra's first husband, whose principles had ultimately cost him his life. In quiet moments, Finn sometimes wondered if he would have had the courage to stand against corruption at such personal risk. As they settled into their new routine, Finn found himself looking forward to returning to their quarters after his shifts. Nikera was often engaged in communication with Dominion legal representatives or managing the portions of her inheritance now accessible to her, but she always paused her work when he entered. They would share a meal, increasingly supplemented with better quality ingredients than station rations, and exchange stories about their days. Their physical comfort with each other had evolved naturally. Touch that had once been deliberately practiced for auditors was now casually exchanged. A hand on the shoulder, fingers brushing while passing objects, sitting close enough for their legs to touch. At night, they slept in each other's arms without awkwardness or hesitation. Neither of them acknowledged the obvious shift in their relationship. Their arrangement had a predetermined conclusion, after all. Once the inheritance was fully secured and the mandatory 6-month period passed, they would separate amicably, as agreed. To admit deeper feelings would only complicate their eventual parting. But on the night of their first full month as a recognized couple, that unspoken agreement was tested. The station had shifted to night cycle, dimming lights to simulate evening and conserve energy. Finn had returned from his shift to find Nikera waiting with a surprise. Real chocolate, not the synthetic substitute available in station rations, and a small flask of amber liquid that proved to be genuinely distilled spirits rather than the chemical approximation sold in the station's recreation section. How did you get these? Finn asked, amazed at the contraband luxuries. I've been making connections, Nikera replied with a hint of mischief in her violet eyes. A trade vessel captain owed a favor to House Valken. I called it in. She poured a small measure of the spirit into 2 makeshift cups. I believe today holds significance. Finn accepted the cup, confused. It does. On Earth calendar, it is 1 standard month since our union was registered. She raised her cup slightly. A milestone worth acknowledging, I thought. The gesture touched Finn deeply. He raised his cup to meet hers. To us, he said simply. To us, she echoed, her eyes holding his as they drank. The spirit burned pleasantly down Finn's throat, warming him from within. The chocolate they shared afterward was rich and complex, nothing like the bland rations he was accustomed to. As they sat side by side on their sleeping platform, shoulders touching, the small celebration created an intimacy that felt dangerous in its intensity. I never expected this, Finn admitted, the spirit perhaps loosening his usual reserve. When you appeared in my quarters that day, I thought it would just be business. A transaction. Nikera nodded, her profile outlined by the dim lighting. I also anticipated a purely pragmatic arrangement. She turned to face him, her expression soft with vulnerability he rarely saw. It has become something else. The admission hung between them, neither quite willing to define what something else might be. Instead, Finn reached out, brushing a strand of silver-white hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Nikera leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When their lips met, it felt inevitable. The natural conclusion to a journey that had begun in desperate circumstances but had led them somewhere neither had anticipated. The kiss deepened, hesitation giving way to certainty as they acknowledged what had been building between them for weeks. Later, as Nikera lay curled against him in the darkness, her skin glowing faintly in the dim light, Finn traced patterns on her shoulder and contemplated the strange turns his life had taken. 1 month ago, he had been a lonely maintenance worker with no prospects and little hope. Now he held in his arms a woman who had transformed his existence in ways he was only beginning to understand. "What happens when this ends?" he asked quietly, giving voice to the question that had haunted him as their connection deepened. After the 6 months, when the inheritance is secured, Nikera was silent for a long moment. "That was our agreement," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "A temporary arrangement for mutual benefit. And if I don't want it to be temporary anymore?" The words escaped before Finn could reconsider them. She raised herself on one elbow to look at him, her expression serious in the darkness. "Finn, my situation remains complicated. House Valken will not simply accept defeat. Their petition challenging our union is still active. If they prove successful, we'll face it together," Finn said with conviction that surprised even him. "Whatever comes, we handle it together." The intensity of his declaration seemed to catch Nikera off guard. She studied his face with those penetrating violet eyes. "You would stand against a powerful house for someone you've known only weeks." "I've spent my life fixing things other people abandon," Finn replied. "Never found anything worth fighting for before. Now I have." Something shifted in Nisra's expression, relief, wonder, and perhaps a touch of fear. She leaned down to kiss him again, a gesture that felt like both a promise and a question. "Together, then," she whispered against his lips. The next morning brought an unwelcome reality check in the form of an official notification. The secondary audit had been rescheduled, moved forward by 2 weeks. The message cited special considerations, but offered no further explanation. "House Valken's influence," Nikera stated grimly, reading the notification. "They're applying pressure for an expedited review, hoping we won't be adequately prepared." Finn felt a surge of determination. "Then we'll disappoint them." He pulled her into an embrace. "We don't need to pretend anymore. This is real." The audit notification, concerning as it was, seemed less threatening in light of their newly acknowledged feelings. They would face the scrutiny together, no longer performing affection, but expressing genuine connection. However, 2 days before the scheduled audit, a more immediate crisis demanded their attention. The station's primary environmental system, the one Finn had been warning management about for months, finally suffered the catastrophic failure he had predicted. Entire sections of the habitat ring lost pressure regulation, temperature control, and in some areas, proper oxygen mixture. Finn was called to emergency duty along with every available technician and engineer on the station. For 26 hours straight, he worked to stabilize critical systems and prevent a complete evacuation. Nikera joined the effort, her knowledge of environmental controls proving invaluable as they rerouted power and replicated emergency parts using the station's limited fabrication capabilities. When the immediate danger had passed, leaving the station functioning at minimal capacity, Finn and Nikera returned to their quarters exhausted but alive. As they cleaned away the grime and collapsed onto their sleeping platform, the reality of what they had just experienced sank in. "We could have died," Finn said quietly, staring at the ceiling. The whole station could have been lost because management ignored basic maintenance needs. Nisra's hand found his in the darkness. But it wasn't. Because of you. Because you care enough to fight for this place, even when those in authority do not. He turned to face her, struck by a sudden clarity. "I don't want to die here, Nikera. I don't want either of us trapped in this falling apart tin can until something finally breaks that can't be fixed. What are you suggesting? After the audit, after your inheritance is secured, let's leave. Together." The idea formed as he spoke it. There are better stations, colonies that need skilled people. Places where we could build something that isn't constantly on the verge of collapse. Nikera was quiet for a long moment, and Finn feared he had overstepped. Then she propped herself up to look at him directly. "You would leave EOS 9? I thought your work here mattered to you." "It does. But the people matter more." He reached up to touch her face gently. "You matter more. And we could help people somewhere with a fighting chance, not a station being run into the ground by corporate neglect." Her expression softened. A new beginning. Together, he affirmed. She leaned down to kiss him, sealing the promise between them. Together. The secondary audit arrived with all the intimidation tactics Finn had expected. Auditor Vexerin returned with an expanded team, including a specialist who was introduced as an expert in union verification, but whose cold scrutiny suggested their real purpose was finding reasons to invalidate the marriage. This time, however, Finn felt no anxiety as they entered the examination room. Whatever tests or questions awaited them, he and Nikera would face them with the strength of genuine connection rather than rehearsed responses. The questioning was more aggressive than their previous experience. The audit team delved into their daily routines, personal habits, and intimate moments with clinical precision. They requested access to communications, living quarters, even medical records. Through it all, Finn and Nikera answered honestly, their shared glances and instinctive movements toward each other speaking as loudly as their words. When the biomarker scan was activated again, requiring them to embrace under observation, Finn pulled Nikera close without hesitation. As her arms wrapped around him and her head tucked perfectly against his shoulder, he closed his eyes and simply experienced the moment. The familiar warmth of her, the subtle vibration beneath her skin, the scent that had become as necessary to him as oxygen. Interesting, Auditor Vexerin commented, studying the readings with a slight frown. Your neurochemical response patterns show significant evolution since the preliminary assessment. Is that a problem? Finn asked, keeping his arm around Nisra's waist as they faced the auditor. Not for regulatory purposes, Vexerin replied with scientific detachment. The patterns indicate genuine attachment, which satisfies legal requirements regardless of the timeline of development. He made a notation on his tablet. However, I am required to note that the petition filed by House Valken contains allegations that your union was initially fraudulent, regardless of subsequent developments. Nikera tensed beside Finn. The Dominion recognizes the results of your own verification protocols, she stated firmly. House Valken's objections are based on speculation, not evidence. Indeed, Vexerin agreed, which is why you have been summoned to a formal hearing to address these allegations directly. A hearing? Finn repeated. You didn't mention that before. The request was filed this morning, Vexerin explained. As House Valken has significant standing within the Dominion, Their petition must be given proper consideration. He handed Nikera a formal notification. You are both required to appear before the Inheritance Tribunal in 14 standard days. Transport has been arranged. After the auditors departed, Finn and Nikera returned to their quarters in somber silence. The notification lay between them on their small table, its official seals seeming to glow with malevolent purpose. A tribunal, Nikera said finally, her voice tight with tension. This is unprecedented. House Valken must have engaged considerable influence to secure a formal hearing. What exactly does that mean for us? Finn asked, studying her worried expression. It means they are not accepting defeat gracefully. She straightened, her jaw set with determination. It means we must be prepared to defend our union before some of the most powerful adjudicators in the Galactic Dominion. Then that's what we'll do, Finn replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. They're expecting a fraudulent marriage arranged for convenience. They have no idea what they're really up against. A small smile curved Nisra's lips, though worry still shadowed her eyes. Your confidence is admirable. Not confidence, Finn corrected. Certainty. What we have is real. All their protocols and tribunals can't change that. As night's cycle approached, they prepared for sleep with the practiced synchronicity of a couple who had learned each other's rhythms. As they settled onto their sleeping platform, Nikera unexpectedly produced a small object from a hidden compartment in her personal case, a crystal similar to the one that adorned their living space, but smaller and with a more intense inner light. This is a heartstone, she explained, placing it in Finn's palm. In Pax Lunarian tradition, it is given to signify deepest trust. It can only be activated by someone of our genetic lineage. She closed his fingers around the crystal. It was my mother's. Finn felt the weight of the gesture. Nikera, when held by someone a Lunarian trusts completely, it resonates with both life forces, she continued. It is significant. As she spoke, the crystal in Finn's hand began to glow, emitting a soft vibration that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. The light it cast shifted between blue and green, creating patterns on their skin. It's beautiful, Finn whispered, mesmerized by the display. It is responding to us, Nikera said softly, wonder in her voice. To our connection. She leaned forward to kiss him, and as their lips met, the crystal's light intensified, casting their shadows against the wall in a dance of merged patterns. Whatever challenges awaited them at the tribunal, in that moment, the truth of their bond was luminous and undeniable. The night before their departure for the tribunal, the station's residential ring was quieter than usual. Many inhabitants had relocated to temporary quarters in other sections while repairs continued on the environmental systems. Finn had worked a final shift, ensuring that critical maintenance would continue in his absence. When he returned to their quarters, he found Nikera placing the last of their essential belongings into a travel case. The room looked strangely empty with their personal items packed away. Ready for tomorrow? He asked, setting down his toolkit. Nikera nodded, seating herself on the edge of their sleeping platform. The transport leaves at first shift. We should arrive at the Central Dominion hub within 30 hours. Finn sat beside her, feeling the weight of the coming challenge. Have you been to the hub before? Several times with Commander Thelius. It is overwhelming if you're unaccustomed to it. Millions of beings from thousands of systems, all conducting Dominion business. She hesitated. Finn, there's something you should know before we face the tribunal. The seriousness in her tone concerned him. What is it? House Valken will have representatives there, powerful ones. They will try to intimidate you, perhaps even attempt to separate us for questioning. Whatever happens, remember that anything you say can be used to challenge our union. I'll be careful, Finn promised. There's more. Nikera took his hands in hers. If the tribunal rules against us, if they determine our marriage was fraudulent, the penalties would extend to you as well. Fines at minimum, possibly labor reassignment to a penal colony. Finn absorbed this information calmly. You're telling me there's risk. Significant risk, she emphasized. I would understand if you reconsidered. We could arrange a statement indicating I misled you about the arrangement, that you were an unwitting participant. Finn framed her face between his hands. Nikera, stop. I'm not abandoning you. Not now, not ever. He smiled slightly. Besides, they'd need a hell of a lot more than fines and labor camps to keep me from you at this point. Relief and something deeper flooded her expression. Without words, she pulled him into an embrace that conveyed everything they felt for each other. Fear for the challenges ahead, strength found in their connection, and a love that had grown between them against all probability. That night, as the station's lights dimmed to night cycle, they lay together in the gentle glow of the Heartstone crystal. Outside their quarters, the station creaked and groaned with the strain of its aging systems. But within their small space, wrapped in each other's arms, they found a peace and certainty that transcended their uncertain future. Whatever happens tomorrow, Finn whispered against Nysera's hair, remember that finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. In all the vastness of space and the countless paths of possibility, she replied, I am grateful that mine led to you. As they drifted toward sleep, the Heartstone's light pulsed steadily between them, a tangible reminder of the force that would carry them into whatever awaited at the tribunal. Not the legal contract that had brought them together, but the genuine bond that had transformed both their lives. Outside the viewport of their quarters, stars gleamed in the eternal night of space, distant and cold. But in the shelter of their embrace, Finn and Nikera had found something that defied the void's emptiness. A connection that had begun with desperate words in a rusted maintenance cabin, but had grown into something neither could have imagined on that fateful day when a proud alien widow had begged a lonely human, marry me, I'll warm your bed. Now, on the eve of their greatest challenge, they faced the future not with the calculation of a business arrangement, but with the strength of hearts truly united, ready to fight for the life they had found together in the most unexpected of places.